What if Luffy trained by Dragon and Garp for 2 years to save Ace? The news reached the world the way all catastrophic news reached the world, through ink and paper and the indifferent machinery of the world government's press system. The same system that had announced wars and executions and the deaths of legends with the identical clean typography it used for shipping lane updates and weather advisories. Porges D. Ace, 2nd Division Commander of the Whitebeard Pirates, captured. Public execution to be held at Marineford. Date 1 month. The newspapers hit every island in the Grand Line and the Four Blues simultaneously, carried by seabirds and ships and the particular speed of information that people do not want to be true but cannot stop spreading. In bars and ports and marine bases and pirate ships and Revolutionary Army outposts, and the quiet offices of the Shichibukai, and the enormous cold chambers of the Gorosei, people read the headline and understood that something large was beginning. On a small, unremarkable island in the West Blue, in a building that did not appear on any official map and that housed the operational center of the Revolutionary Army's Western Intelligence Division, a man stood at a window and held a newspaper, and did not move for a very long time. Monkey D. Dragon read the headline once. He set the newspaper down on the table. He stood at the window for another minute, looking out at the gray morning sea, his expression doing nothing visible, not because he felt nothing, but because Dragon had spent 20 years building the architecture of his self-control and it held even now, even for this. Porges D. Ace, Whitebeard's 2nd Division Commander. Luffy's brother. He turned from the window. Get me a direct channel to Garp, he said, to the room behind him, where 3 of his most senior intelligence officers had been waiting in the specific silence of people who understood that their commander needed a moment and that the moment was over. A pause. One of them, Koala, young and steady and the best intelligence mind in the Army's Western operation, said carefully, Sir, you want us to establish direct communication with Vice Admiral Monkey D. Garp. Yes, the Marine hero. Yes, Dragon said in the tone that closed discussions without requiring further explanation. Koala looked at him for a moment with the particular expression of someone filing away the fact that the world was about to become significantly more complicated. I'll get you the channel, she said. It'll take 2 hours. You have one, Dragon said, and left the room. He did not go to the communication room. He went to the roof. The wind on this island was constant. It came off the West Blue in long, cold sheets that the locals had learned to build their structures against, angling everything slightly away from the prevailing direction. Dragon had spent 11 months using this base and had never before stood on its roof. He stood there now with his cloak moving in the wind and looked at the sea. He thought about Water 7. He had intelligence reports that placed his son there, the Straw Hat crew, recovering from the Enies Lobby incident, resupplying, celebrating in the way young people celebrated when they survived something impossible. His son, alive and laughing somewhere on an island he had not visited, eating and sleeping and being exactly himself in the way that Dragon had observed from a distance through a decade of intelligence reports and newspaper clippings and the occasional field agent's note that always somehow managed to convey, even through professional language, that Monkey D. Luffy was completely indescribable. He had a file on his son. An actual file. It sat in his personal cabinet, accessible only to him, and it contained every newspaper clipping that mentioned Luffy from the first one, a small item from the East Blue, something about a boy who had defeated a pirate crew threatening a fishing village, not even worth a bounty yet, to the most recent, the poster with the 30 million berry figure that the East Blue Marines had issued after Arlong's defeat, and then the subsequent ones as the number climbed, 100 million after Alabasta, the crossed-out poster from Enies Lobby with 300 million. He had never shown anyone the file. He thought about the last time he had seen his son's face in person, rather than in a photograph or a field report. Luffy had been 7. Dragon had been. He had been the age that Luffy was now, approximately. He had been in the middle of a thing that was still forming into the shape it would eventually take. The revolution still more idea than organization. The world's wrongness still burning in him as something raw and not yet weaponized. He had looked at his son for what he'd known was the last time for a very long while, and he had said nothing, because there was nothing safe to say, because his son would not be safe if people knew whose son he was. And Dragon had made the specific choice that people who believe in something larger than themselves sometimes make. The choice that costs them. The thing they love to preserve, the thing they believe in. He had told himself it was the right choice for 20 years. Standing on this roof with Ace's execution date printed in his memory, he was not thinking about whether it had been right. He was thinking about his son's face at 7, and his son's face at whatever age he was now in that photograph from the Eni's lobby reportage, and the distance between those two faces. All the years he had watched from far enough away that he could tell himself watching counted as being there. Luffy did not know his father's face. He knew the name, Monkey D. Dragon, the world's most wanted man, because it had come out in the papers and Garp had apparently not bothered to deny it with any particular commitment. But knowing a name was not the same as knowing a face. Dragon would have to introduce himself. The thought was so absurd, so specifically painful in its absurdity, that he stood with it for a moment and simply let it be what it was. Then he went back downstairs, because sentiment was a thing he could afford in the appropriate increments, and this was not the moment for more than he'd already taken. The channel to Garp took 43 minutes, which was faster than Koala's revised estimate, and said something about the urgency that the intelligence team had correctly read into the instruction. Dragon sat in front of the communication den Mushi and waited. When it connected, the first thing Garp said was, "You, me," Dragon said. A pause. The den Mushi relayed the quality of the silence, the particular weight of two people who had a great deal of history and none of the vocabulary for it. "I figured you'd call," Garp said. His voice was its usual enormous self, even through the snail's translation, the voice of a man built on a scale that exceeded most people's reference points. But there was something in it that Dragon had not heard there before. Something that was doing the same work Dragon's roof standing had been doing, 15 minutes ago. "You've seen the newspaper," Dragon said. "I know everything in that newspaper," Garp said. "I knew it before the newspaper. I'm a vice admiral. Ace's situation has been. I've been aware of it." A pause. "I've been trying to figure out how to," he stopped. The silence had a specific quality. "This isn't something I can fix from inside. You understand? I've been in this uniform for 40 years and this is something that is happening inside this institution that I cannot fix from inside it." Dragon understood. He had understood it 20 years ago, which was why he was where he was rather than where Garp was. He did not say this. "Where is he?" Dragon said. "Water 7, last I checked. Still celebrating. He doesn't know yet." A pause. "Or he does and he's already trying to do something stupid about it on his own, that's also a possibility. Which is more likely?" A long pause. "He's my grandson," Garp said heavily. "What do you think is more likely?" Dragon thought about the file in his cabinet. The boy who had taken on Arlong and Crocodile and Enel and Rob Lucci, all of them challenges that should have been too large, all of them overcome through the combination of impossible physical ability and the specific quality of determination that Luffy had that Dragon had no clinical name for but that appeared in every field report, every newspaper account, every observer's description, the thing that made Luffy Luffy, the thing that was somehow more dangerous than any technique or power. "I'm going to contact him," Dragon said. The silence from Garp's end was so complete, and so sudden that Dragon checked the den Mushi to make sure the connection was still active. "You're going to," Garp said finally. "Contact him. Directly." "Yes. You've never. In his entire life you've never." "I know," Dragon said. Another silence. This one had a different texture, not the weight of two men with history, but the weight of one man processing something that was reorganizing something internal. When Garp spoke again his voice had changed slightly, in a way that Dragon could not entirely name. "All right," he said. "All right. And then what?" "And then we train him," Dragon said. "Together." The silence that followed this was the longest one yet. "You and me," Garp said. "Yes." "Training Luffy." "Yes." "Together." "That is what I said, Dragon." Garp's voice had acquired the quality it got, Dragon knew from old memory, when he was working very hard to maintain a specific emotional register and not entirely succeeding. "The last time you and I were in the same location for more than 10 minutes, you had just told me you were dismantling your marine career to start a revolution against the world government. We did not part on what I would call excellent terms. I know. And you want us to jointly train our grandson and son respectively." "He is both," Dragon said. "That is the point. He is both, and he has 1 month to become capable of surviving Marineford, and neither of us alone can give him what he needs in 1 month. You can build his body and his combat instincts. I can give him strategy, and the knowledge he needs about his fruit. A pause. Together we might be enough. Separately, either of us is. A very long silence. His fruit, Garp said. Sharply. What do you know about his fruit? Enough, Dragon said. I'll tell you when we're in the same location. That's not, Garp. Dragon used the name the way he rarely used names, with the full weight of intention behind it. 1 month. That's what we have. Are you with me or not? The Den Mushi hummed. Tell me where, Garp said. Luffy was, at the moment Dragon's encoded message arrived at Water 7, hanging upside down from the rigging of the Thousand Sunny, eating a full roasted pig with the focused enthusiasm of someone who had decided this was the most important task currently available to him. He had not seen the newspaper. This was not unusual. Luffy's relationship with current events operated on a need-to-know basis where the need was defined very specifically by whether the information was directly relevant to eating or punching something, and newspaper headlines rarely cleared that bar unless someone specifically put them in front of him. Nami had seen the newspaper. She was sitting on the deck below with it folded in her hands and an expression on her face that the crew had learned, over 2 years, to read as the specific variety of Nami worry that was not about money and not about weather and not about the crew's collective tendency towards survival testing decisions. The variety that was about something real. She had not told Luffy yet. She was deciding how to tell him. She was also deciding whether she should tell him before she understood the full picture, which was the approach she always took with information: understand it first, then deliver it cleanly. Because dropping a live explosive in Luffy's lap without a plan for what came next was not a risk she was willing to take with this particular headline. She was so focused on the question of how that she almost missed the small, unfamiliar Den Mushi that appeared on the deck railing. It was not one of theirs. It was compact, military-looking, sealed with a frequency marker she did not recognize, not marine, not the standard pirate channels, something else, something that had the quality of equipment that was not available commercially. It rang once. A quiet, controlled ring, not the standard Den Mushi bleat. Luffy dropped from the rigging and landed on the deck beside it with the rubber-limbed ease of someone for whom falling was simply an alternative form of movement. He looked at it. That's not ours, he said. No, Nami said. He picked it up. The voice that came through it was not what anyone present would have been able to predict, because no one on the Thousand Sunny had ever heard it before. It was controlled and low, and had the quality of someone who had made a decision about every word before saying it. Monkey D. Luffy, the voice said. Luffy blinked. That's me, he said, with the uncomplicated directness of someone who had never had reason to doubt their own identity. I know, the voice said. My name is Dragon. The deck went very quiet. Nami's expression did something complicated and rapid. Usopp, who had appeared from below deck at the sound of an unfamiliar voice, stopped moving entirely. Robin, sitting at the ship's stern with a book, turned her head with the contained precision of someone who had just received information that required a complete reassessment of the immediate situation. Luffy looked at the Den Mushi with the specific expression he made when something was interesting. Dragon, he said. Like the world's most wanted man dragon. Old man Garp says you're my dad. A pause from the Den Mushi. Brief. Controlled. Yes, Dragon said. Cool, Luffy said. I've never talked to you before. No, Dragon said. You haven't. Another pause. I'm calling because of Ace. And there it was. Nami watched Luffy's face and saw the thing happen that she had been dreading, the brightness going somewhere else, the fundamental Luffiness of him shifting register from the open-throttle enthusiasm of ordinary moments to the thing underneath it that the crew had seen only a few times and that was, in its way, more powerful and more frightening than anything he did in a fight. The thing that came when someone he loved was in danger. The thing with no ceiling. What about Ace? Luffy said. His voice was the same. The same voice. But the quality of it had changed in the way that water changes quality when it gets close to the edge of a fall. Still water. Still the same thing, and yet completely different. He's been captured, Dragon said. By the Marines. His execution is scheduled at Marineford in 1 month. Luffy was silent. This was unusual enough that the entire assembled crew registered it, the absence of the immediate loud reaction, the thinking that was happening instead. How do I save him? Luffy said. Not can I save him. Not what do we do. How do I save him? The outcome already decided, already fixed, the question only about method. Nami felt something in her chest that was not quite relief and not quite fear and was mostly something like recognition. This was Luffy, exactly Luffy, the reason they had followed him across 2 years and every impossible obstacle. That's why I'm calling, Dragon said. You can't save him as you are. You are not strong enough yet. Marineford will have 3 admirals, the full strength of Marine headquarters, and every warlord the world government can mobilize. What you have now is not sufficient. A pause. But you have 1 month, and I am going to train you. Along with someone else. Who? Luffy said. Your grandfather. Luffy processed this. Gramps is going to help. Yes. Gramps never goes easy on me, Luffy said, with what sounded like cheerful historical recall. He's not going to go easy on you, Dragon confirmed. Neither am I. What we're going to do to you in the next month will be the hardest thing you've ever experienced. You may fail. You may not reach what you need to reach. The outcome is not guaranteed. A pause. But doing nothing guarantees Ace's death. Luffy was quiet again. The ship creaked in the Water 7 harbor. Somewhere on the island, the celebration they had been in the middle of was still going on, its sounds drifting across the water, distant laughter, music, the ordinary joyful noise of a world that had not yet received this particular morning's newspaper. Okay, Luffy said, just okay. The one word, plain and complete. You'll need to separate from your crew for the duration, Dragon said. They can be positioned near Marineford when the time comes, but the training requires. No, Luffy said. A pause. No, my crew comes, Luffy said. They don't have to do your training. But they're not sitting somewhere waiting. They'll do their own thing. But they're going to be there when we go to get Ace. He paused. That's not up for discussion. A longer pause from Dragon's end. Then, remarkably, all right. Nami exhaled a breath she had not realized she was holding. I'm sending coordinates, Dragon said. A Revolutionary Army base. Come alone first, you and the Den Den Mushi. Then you can bring your crew. A pause. And Luffy. What? The pause from Dragon's end had a quality that Nami, watching Luffy's face, would later describe to Robin as the sound of someone trying to say something they had never said before and not having the right equipment for it. Nothing, Dragon said. The coordinates will arrive in the next hour. Be ready to move. The Den Den Mushi went quiet. Luffy held it for a moment. Then he set it down on the railing and turned to face his crew with the expression that Nami had come to think of as his battle face. Not the wild, grinning fury of a fight already happening, but the quieter, harder, more complete face of someone who has seen the destination and is calculating, in the simple total way that Luffy calculated things, the route. Ace is in trouble, he said. We heard, Zoro said, from the crow's nest above, where he had apparently been awake and listening the entire time. We're going to go get him, Luffy said. Heard that too, Zoro said. My dad is going to train me first, Luffy said. And Gramps. A beat. Your grandfather, Sanji said, appearing from the kitchen hatch with a cigarette and the expression of someone rapidly revising their near-term expectations. The Marine Vice Admiral who has tried to arrest us 14 times. He's going to help, Luffy said. Dragon said so? Dragon, Robin said from the stern, with the contained precision she brought to the most significant pieces of information. Monkey D. Dragon said that Monkey D. Garp is going to help train you to attack Marine headquarters. Yep, Luffy said. The crew processed this collectively, which took a moment. All right, Nami said, because someone had to and it was always her. I'll chart a course to the coordinates when they arrive. She paused. And Luffy, he looked at her. We're all going to Marineford, she said. Every single one of us. We're getting Ace back. Luffy looked at her for a moment, the full look, the one that took in everything, that Nami had learned meant he was actually seeing you rather than looking past you at the horizon. He smiled. Not the wide grin, not the battle face. Something simpler and more complete. I know, he said. That's why you're my crew. The coordinates arrived 40 minutes later, encoded in a format that Robin decoded in under 3 minutes and that Nami was able to plot in another 5. A Revolutionary Army island, small, isolated, positioned in a section of the Grand Line that the Marines officially logged as navigational hazard territory, and therefore rarely patrolled. 3 days sailing at the Sunny's best speed. While Nami worked, Luffy sat at the ship's bow, legs dangling over the water, looking at the direction they would travel. He was thinking about Ace. Not the capture, not the execution date, not the month of impossible training ahead of him, just Ace. The specific reality of his brother, the face and the voice and the fist that had hit him more times than he could count, and that had also, when he was small and the world was very large and very frightening, been the thing between him and everything that wanted to hurt him. He was thinking about the last time he'd seen Ace, on the Moby Dick, the brief visit before the East Blue Arc had pulled them in opposite directions again. Ace's face when he'd waved goodbye from the rail. The way Ace always waved goodbye like he'd be seeing you soon, like the world was not large enough to keep them apart for long, because for Ace it never had been. Ace could always find Luffy when it mattered, had always known which direction to go, had the homing instinct for his little brother that was not a devil fruit ability but was just Ace. Now Luffy had to find him. That was different. Luffy was bad at finding people. He was good at running into them. But he had learned, over 2 years on the Grand Line, that what he was bad at could be changed if he hit it hard enough and refused to stop. That was not a comfortable process. It was often a painful one. It frequently involved being hit by things much larger than himself. He thought about the voice on the Den Den Mushi. Controlled. Low. Choosing every word. Dragon. His father. Luffy turned the word over in his mind with the uncomplicated curiosity he brought to things that were new to him. He had not grown up thinking much about his father. Garp had filled the space that was available for old authority figures who are also family with such total completeness that the abstract category of father had never had much room to develop into something he felt the absence of. He knew Dragon's name. He knew the reputation. World's most wanted man, leader of the Revolutionary Army. The person the world government named specifically when they talked about the enemies of the established order. He didn't know the voice. He knew it now, controlled, low, choosing every word. It was not Garp's voice. Garp's voice was a force of nature, something that happened to the surrounding air whether or not it intended to. Dragon's voice was the opposite, precision, intention, every word going exactly where it was placed. Luffy wondered, briefly and without particular resolution, what it was going to be like to be in the same place as both of them at once. He decided it was probably going to be interesting. He stretched his arms out in front of him, the rubber extending and snapping back, the comfortable familiar motion of someone checking that the body was still itself. He thought about Marineford, 3 admirals, the full strength of Marine headquarters. Every warlord the world government could mobilize. 1 month. He had taken on Crocodile as a warlord and an impossible desert fortress. He had taken on Enel as a god and an island in the sky. He had taken on CP9 and Eni's lobby and the full force of marine justice for Robin's sake. He had never taken on anything like this. He stretched his arms out again. Let them snap back. Felt the particular quality of his own power, the thing he understood as rubber, as bounce and flex and the property of not staying broken. The thing that was bigger than he had ever fully understood but that he had learned to trust. Dragon knew something about his fruit. The voice had said it. I'll tell you when we're in the same location. Luffy was not particularly curious about secret knowledge as a category. He was specifically, extremely curious about this one thing, not because of power. Not because knowing the truth of his ability would make him stronger, though it probably would. Because Ace had taught him, years ago, that you should know what you were. That was Ace's voice in his memory, from a dozen conversations on a hilltop in Fusha village, the older brother who was always slightly ahead of him and always turning back to check. You should know what you are, Luffy. If you don't know what you are, you can't decide what you're going to be. He wanted to know what he was. Hey, Nami said, appearing beside him. Course is plotted. We can leave in an hour, after we finish resupplying. Okay, Luffy said. She sat beside him on the bow, which was not her usual position. Nami preferred the navigation station and the upper deck where she could see the weather. She sat beside him on the bow and looked at the water and said, after a moment, Are you scared? Luffy thought about this with the genuine consideration he gave to questions that deserved it. No, he said. Not scared. A pause. There's something else. Something that's like scared but isn't. When the thing you're worried about is someone else. That's fear on someone's behalf, Nami said. It's different from being scared for yourself. Worse in some ways. Yeah, Luffy said. That. She was quiet for a moment. The Water 7 harbor moved around them, the ordinary sounds of a port city carrying on. We'll get him back, she said. Not as comfort. As statement. Nami did not offer comfort she did not believe. It was not in her construction. When she said something with that quality, she meant it. I know, Luffy said. The Thousand Sunny rocked gently in the harbor, and the sun moved in the sky, and 1 month from now the world was going to be different in ways that nobody could fully predict but that were, in this moment, beginning. It was beginning right here, with the sound of a den mushi that had rung once, controlled and quiet, and a voice that had said, do you want to save him, or do you want to stay weak? Not those words exactly, but those words in essence, and Luffy had heard the essence the way he always heard what people really meant rather than what they said. He had heard, I am going to help you, from a man who had left when he was small. He had heard it, and he had decided what to do with it. With the clean totality that was the most essentially Luffy thing about him. You got what was being offered, you used it for what it was for, you didn't hold the complicated history of it against the present fact of it. Dragon was going to help. Garp was going to help. His crew was going to be there. Ace was going to come home. Luffy stretched his arm one more time, let it snap back, felt it. Let's go, he said. 3 days away, on a Revolutionary Army island that did not appear on any official map, Dragon stood in front of a training facility and looked at the sky. He had the file from his cabinet. He had brought it. He had not fully examined why he had brought it, except that it was the one concession he had allowed himself to the part of him that was not the revolutionary commander, but was something older and less organized and more easily undone. He opened it to the most recent photograph. Eni's lobby. The wanted poster image, his son's face, grinning, the 300 million berry figure below it, the word wanted in the marine typography that Dragon had spent 20 years fighting against. His son's face, grinning? He had seen photographs before. He had seen the progression of them, from 7 years old to now. He knew the face. He still was not prepared for it. Across the Grand Line, in a marine base that was very carefully not the subject of surveillance right now because he had spent 40 years learning exactly where all the surveillance was, Garp sat at a table with a bowl of rice crackers and a den mushi and thought about the conversation he just had. Dragon was going to train Luffy. He was going to help Dragon train Luffy. He was going to be standing next to his son, whom he had not stood next to voluntarily since before Luffy was born, since before the decision that Dragon had made and that Garp had argued against and that had turned out to be, in the way of things that are both wrong and necessary, correct, and they were going to do the thing that neither of them had done for Luffy separately or together or at all, which was be actually there, in the same place, for the same purpose for him. Garp ate a rice cracker. It tasted like every rice cracker he had eaten at every terrible moment of the past 20 years. He picked up his marine jacket. Set it down. Looked at it. 1 month. After that, what happened after that, happened after that. He had been a marine for 40 years. He had been Luffy's grandfather for 18. He had always known, somewhere beneath the uniform and the rank and the institution he had believed in with the same totality that Dragon believed in his revolution, that when the moment came where those two things could not both be true, he knew which one was him. He put the jacket back on. He had to wear it to get to where he was going. He could figure out what came after. He stood up. Garp. One of the junior officers at the door, young Ernest. Sir, will you be back for the afternoon briefing? Garp looked at him. Thought about 40 years. Thought about a boy he had carried on his shoulders in a village in the East Blue. Thought about Dragon's voice on the den mushi, controlled and low, saying, Are you with me or not? Probably not, Garp said, and walked out. The Revolutionary Army Island had no name on any official chart. The locals, there were no locals, would have called it what the Revolutionary Army's operational staff called it in internal communications, Station 12, which was the kind of name that told you everything about the people who had named it, and nothing about the place itself. It was a mid-sized island in a pocket of the Grand Line where the weather patterns created a natural navigation barrier that kept casual marine patrols away and made accurate den mushy triangulation difficult enough to be practically useless. Rocky coastline. Dense interior forest. A mountain range along the northern edge that caught weather systems and generated the kind of persistent low cloud cover that made aerial observation unreliable. Dragon had chosen it 3 years ago for exactly those reasons. He had used it since as a training base, a safe house, and an operational staging ground for the Revolutionary Army's Western Grand Line activities. It was staffed by 12 people, all of whom had been briefed on what was coming and all of whom had been carefully evaluated for the psychological and professional stability required to be in the same location as what was coming. 4 of them had requested reassignment to other stations after the briefing. Dragon had approved the reassignments without comment. He understood the instinct. He was, himself, not entirely comfortable with what was coming, and he had been the one to arrange it. The Thousand Sunny arrived on the 3rd morning. Dragon watched it from the cliff above the harbor. The ship came around the eastern headland with the particular quality of motion that characterized vessels with competent navigators, taking the approach angle that used the current rather than fighting it, the kind of seamanship that looked effortless and was the product of either long experience, or exceptional natural aptitude, or some combination. The ship itself was, he had read the intelligence reports, he knew about the Frankie-built upgrade to the Going Merry successor, but the intelligence reports had not fully conveyed the quality of the thing. It was a good ship. A strong ship. The kind of ship that looked like the people who sailed it had opinions about what they were going to do, and had built accordingly. He looked at the figure at the bow. Luffy was standing at the front of the ship with his arms stretched out to either side, just stretched and hanging in the wind, and Dragon thought, he does that because he can, because the feeling of the wind in extended rubber is something he enjoys. And nobody told him to stop, and so he never stopped. It was a small observation. It told him something about who his son was and how his son had been raised, and the telling was complicated in the specific way that Dragon had been avoiding examining for 20 years. He went down to the harbor. The crew was a lot. Dragon had been prepared for Monkey D. Luffy, approximately. He had the file. He had the years of reports. He had the specific preparation of a man who had thought about this meeting more than he would ever admit. He had not been adequately prepared for the crew. They came off the ship in the way that Dragon's intelligence reports had collectively described but that no individual report had fully conveyed, as a unit, as a specific thing that was more than the sum of its parts, each of them individual and distinct and simultaneously part of something larger. The swordsman with the 3 swords and the scar that had not been there in the last set of reports. The navigator with the precision of someone who navigated by the actual stars and not just the instruments. The sharpshooter who was clearly terrified and clearly going to go through with it anyway. The cook who was doing an assessment of every person and the entire island simultaneously and pretending not to. The doctor who was small and startling and apparently in a hat. The archaeologist who looked at Dragon the way you looked at a piece of history you had not expected to encounter in person. The shipwright who was, by any objective measure, built more like a ship than a person. The musician who was a skeleton, which Dragon absorbed without visible reaction because he had been managing visible reactions for 20 years and was not going to fail at it now. And Luffy. Luffy walked down the gangway and stood on the dock of Station 12 and looked at Dragon with the same direct, uncomplicated gaze that Dragon had seen in every photograph, and that was completely different in person because photographs did not have the quality that Luffy's eyes had in person, the look of someone who was completely present, completely engaged, with no layer of performance or management between what they were seeing and what they felt about it. Dragon looked at his son. His son looked at him. "You look like me," Luffy said. Observation, not accusation. The simple noting of a visible fact. Dragon was aware that this was true. He had always been aware of it. The photographs had been insufficient warning for how true it was in person. The same jaw, the same build, the same fundamental architecture, separated by 20 years and expressed in 2 completely different directions. "Yes," Dragon said. Luffy nodded. He seemed to be processing something, turning it over, looking at it from the angles. Then he said, "You said you'd train me?" "Yes," Dragon said. "And Gramps is coming?" "He arrives tomorrow morning." Luffy nodded again. "Okay. He looked at the island, the forest, the mountain range, the training facility visible through the tree line. Where do we start? Dragon looked at him. At the complete, total, forward-moving practicality of it. No reunion scene. No confrontation about the years of absence. No demand for explanation or apology or accounting. Just, where do we start? He had prepared responses for the confrontation. He had prepared for anger, which would have been reasonable. He had prepared for the cold reception, which would have been understandable. He had prepared for the version of this meeting where Luffy told him what he thought of a father who had never been present, and Dragon had to find words for things he had spent 20 years not finding words for. He had not prepared for where do we start. The training facility is a half-mile inland, Dragon said. Your crew can use the western barracks. Training begins at dawn. He paused. There are some things I need to tell you before Garp arrives. Tonight. About my fruit, Luffy said. Dragon looked at him. You remembered. You said you'd tell me, Luffy said, with the simple logic of someone for whom a thing said was a thing that would be done. So I remembered. Dragon looked at his son for a moment longer than the practical requirements of the conversation demanded. Then he turned toward the tree line. Tonight, he said. Come alone. Sure, Luffy said, and turned back to his crew and said something that made three of them argue simultaneously, which appeared to be a standard operational state for the Straw Hat Pirates. Dragon walked toward the facility. He did not look back. He was aware, in the way he was aware of most things, comprehensively, precisely, without permitting the awareness to interfere with function, that his hands, inside his cloak, were not entirely steady. Garp arrived the following morning at the hour before dawn, which Dragon had expected because Garp had always moved at the pace of someone who believed that arriving before the stated time was a form of competitive advantage over whatever the day was planning to do to him. He came in a small marine scout vessel that had been cleared for this specific movement through channels that Garp had managed himself, using the kind of institutional authority that a 40-year career and a reputation for legendary capability bought you. Not official authorization, exactly, but the practical reality that when Garp said he was going somewhere alone for personal reasons, the marine bureaucracy had learned that questioning this created more difficulty than simply noting it in the log and moving on. Dragon was at the harbor when the vessel came in. Garp stepped off the boat and stood on the dock and looked at Dragon across 20 years. He was larger than Dragon remembered. This was not accurate in the physical sense. Garp was the same size he had always been, which was the size of someone who had decided that being human-sized was not a requirement he needed to observe. But there was something about the presence of the man in person rather than in Dragon's assessed awareness of him as an intelligence and tactical factor that had a quality of largeness that photographs and reports could not carry. He was also, Dragon noted, not in his marine uniform. He was in civilian clothes, dark, plain, the kind of clothes that said nothing about the wearer except that they had decided not to announce themselves today. Dragon registered this and understood it, and did not address it because some things were better left unaddressed until the work of addressing them was necessary. Dragon, Garp said. Garp, Dragon said. They stood on the dock at Station 12 in the early morning dark and looked at each other with the full weight of everything that was between them, which was considerable, which was in fact a quantity of weight that would have been visible from outside as a specific quality of atmospheric density, the kind of density that happens when two forces occupy the same space. He's here? Garp said. Asleep, Dragon said. He and the crew arrived yesterday. Garp looked at the island. The forest. The facility through the tree line. His jaw worked slightly. You talked to him? Last night, Dragon said. About the fruit. Garp was quiet for a moment. And? He listened, Dragon said. He asked 2 questions. He said he didn't care about any of it as long as it helped him get Ace back. A sound came from Garp. Dragon had been trying, for 20 years, to construct a word for the particular sound Garp made when something hit him in the specific place where he kept the things he loved. He had never found the word. The sound existed outside the categories he had available. That's him, Garp said. Yes, Dragon said. That's him. They began walking toward the facility. For approximately 3 minutes they walked in silence, which was already, Dragon knew, the longest period of non-conflict they were likely to manage. Because in the specific situation of 2 people who had a great deal of history, and directly opposing worldviews and were about to share operational command over the thing both of them cared about most. The silence was not neutral. It was a compressed state. It was going to decompress. The training schedule, Dragon said, because initiating the decompression in a controlled way was better than waiting for it to happen at its own pace. I've drafted a structure. 26 days. Progressive loading, physical conditioning, combat development, and philosophical framework running simultaneously. Philosophical framework, Garp said. Understanding why he fights, not just how. Strategic thinking. Knowing when to disengage. He's not a strategist, Garp said. He's never going to be a strategist. That's not what he is. It doesn't have to be his primary mode, Dragon said. It has to be available to him. Marineford is not a fight he can win through raw power alone. Even with development, even with everything I think he can reach, 3 admirals and Sengoku on their own territory is not a straight power calculation problem. I know that, Garp said, with the sharp edge of someone who was being told something they had been thinking about before the conversation started. I've thought about Marineford. I know what's in there. I spent 40 years building my career inside that institution. Then you know why the philosophical framework matters, Dragon said. I know why it matters, Garp said. I don't know that your way of delivering it is what Luffy needs. Luffy doesn't learn through abstraction. He learns through contact. He learns by doing things and getting hit by the results. I'm aware of how he learns, Dragon said, and heard the edge in his own voice that he had not intended to be there. The edge that came from the specific discomfort of having someone describe how your son learns in a way that made clear they had been there for the learning, and you had not. Garp heard the edge. He looked at Dragon sideways. You've read files, he said. I've watched him get up after being knocked down 1,000 times. It's different. Yes, Dragon said. It is different. That's why we're both here. A pause. The forest path opened into the training facility's clearing. A large open space with a weighted obstacle course along the northern edge, a combat platform in the center, equipment storage, and the main building along the south. Dragon had spent 2 months preparing this facility for what was going to happen in it. Garp looked at it. His professional assessment was visible in the way he moved his eyes across it, cataloging, evaluating. The combat platform's too small, he said. It's deliberately too small, Dragon said. Constrained space development. Learning to work in close quarters without relying on range. Against admirals he's going to need range, Garp said. Against admirals he's going to need everything, Dragon said. We're building everything. The platform is still too small. We can expand it. Day 3, Garp said. By day 3 he'll have broken the current one anyway. They stood at the edge of the clearing and looked at the facility, and the conversation had already been running at the frequency that Dragon had expected, each statement a negotiation, each position a flag planted on the terrain of how this was going to go. Not hostile, exactly. Not the hostility of enemies, which they were officially and had been officially for 20 years. Something more specific. The particular friction of 2 people who were both right in different ways and who were both aware that being right in different ways was not the same as having a workable plan. The physical conditioning schedule, Dragon said. 3 sessions daily. Morning, midday, evening. Each 2 hours. 6 hours of physical conditioning is too much, Garp said. He'll burn out after 5 days. He needs recovery time built in. He regenerates faster than standard human baseline, Dragon said. His devil fruit provides structural resilience. His devil fruit doesn't address muscle fatigue and chakra. Haki depletion, Garp said. He's not invincible. He's durable. Those aren't the same thing. A pause. 4 hours physical, 2 hours recovery active, 2 hours your framework work. Dragon considered this. It was not wrong. Agreed, he said. With the provision that the framework work is not optional and is not reduced when the physical sessions run over. When has anything Luffy does run under scheduled time? Garp said, which was not a question. Never, Dragon said, which was information from the file and was also, apparently, something Garp said with the weight of personal witness. They were quiet for a moment. The Haki development, Dragon said. He's been using Haoshiku without knowing what it is and with no control. He has the foundation for Kenbunshiku. He reads combat situations with an accuracy that exceeds his technical training, which suggests latent observational Haki. And for Busashoku, he's never learned to coat, Garp said. He knows the hardening instinct. He did it against that pacifist you've got in your intelligence reports, probably without understanding what he was doing. But he can't do it deliberately, and he can't sustain it. 26 days to get all three to functional level, Dragon said. How Shaku is going to be the problem, Garp said. He can't control what he is. He's never been able to control it. I've watched him knock out half a crowd accidentally because something made him angry. He paused. He's got his mother's heart and his grandfather's constitution and whatever the hell you contributed. The strategic thinking, Dragon said, with the specific precision of someone declining to let that sentence end on its own. Garp looked at him. He punches first, Garp said. He does, Dragon agreed. We're going to teach him what to do after the punch. Luffy was already on the training platform when they reached the facility's main clearing. This was, Dragon noted, approximately 40 minutes before the training was scheduled to begin, which meant that Luffy had either woken before dawn or had not slept, and from the alert, energized quality of his movement, he was running through something that resembled a kata but was more improvised, testing ranges and angles with the rubber-limbed specificity of someone exploring the parameters of a space. Dragon assessed it as not sleeping, or sleeping briefly and badly, which was what Dragon himself had done, though he would not have shared this information. Luffy saw them and stopped. He looked at Garp. His face did the complicated thing that Dragon had seen it do in photographs when something significant was happening, not hiding the feeling. Luffy was constitutionally incapable of hiding feelings, but processing multiple feelings simultaneously in a way that showed all of them at once. Gramps, he said. Luffy, Garp said, and crossed the clearing and hit him. Dragon had been expecting something. He had not been expecting this. Not a formal greeting, not a speech, not any of the reunion-adjacent behavior that the situation might have implied. Garp crossed the clearing and delivered a direct, full-force hit to the top of Luffy's head with the fist of love that Dragon had heard about in intelligence reports, and that was, in person, a kinetic event of a scale that he was recalibrating his understanding of. Luffy hit the ground. He bounced, because he was rubber, because the elastic properties of his fruit distributed the impact in ways that would have ended a non-devil fruit user, and he came up grinning with the specific grin of someone who was in pain and experiencing it as a form of communication. That's for worrying me, Garp said. I haven't done anything yet, Luffy said. That's for what you're about to do, Garp said. Preemptive. Then Garp reached down and picked Luffy up by the back of his vest and looked at him for a moment, and Dragon was far enough away that he could observe without being observed. And what he saw on Garp's face in that unguarded moment was something that he had not expected, which was not the word for it exactly. Had not let himself expect, because what was on Garp's face when he looked at Luffy was the thing Dragon had told himself he had made the right choice in sacrificing. The thing he had told himself was better expressed as absence than as presence, because presence would have put his son in danger. Pure, unconditional, total love. The kind that didn't require the person to be anything other than themselves. The kind that had been there before they were born and would be there past every stupid thing they did and every worry they caused and every impossible situation they walked into. Garp set Luffy down. Right, he said. Let's see what you've got. Dragon walked into the clearing. The first session lasted 4 hours and destroyed 2 pieces of training equipment, 1 section of the obstacle course's northern wall, and the comfortable fiction that they were going to agree on anything easily. It began with assessment, Dragon's approach systematic, starting from what was known and building toward what could be developed, beginning with a series of structured exercises designed to reveal the ceiling of each ability category. Garp's approach was to hit Luffy until something new happened. These were not, in practice, easily combined methodologies. You're going to collapse his gear second prematurely, Dragon said, watching Garp push Luffy into the 5th consecutive round of escalating pressure, each round harder than the last. Luffy's blood pumping at speeds that Dragon understood from medical intelligence were already at the upper edge of the technique's sustainable range. He needs to know where the wall is, Garp said. You can't train past a wall you haven't found. There are methods for locating walls that don't involve structural risk to the subject, Dragon said. He's not a subject, Garp said sharply. I didn't say he. You said the subject, Garp said. He's not a subject. He's Luffy. Use his name. Dragon looked at Garp. Something in the look was complicated in a way he did not entirely address. He needs to know where the wall is, Dragon said, which was Garp's point and was also his concession. I understand that. But the approach needs to be. Tell me your approach, Garp said. Dragon described it. Garp argued with 3 of the 5 components. Dragon revised 2 and held the third. Garp accepted the revision and contested the held position. They argued about the held position for 7 minutes while Luffy, between rounds, sat on the training platform eating an enormous quantity of food that he had apparently brought in a pack and that he consumed with the focused efficiency of someone refueling a machine. You're both really loud, Luffy said from the platform. They looked at him. I can hear you from here, he said. You're arguing about how to train me. While I'm right here. A pause. Would you like to contribute to the discussion? Dragon said, and heard the slightly sharp edge in it that he had not intended, the edge of someone who was not used to being called out on their process. Luffy looked at him with the direct, uncomplicated gaze. I want to do both, he said. Whatever Gramps does and whatever you do. I don't care if it's too much. I've got 1 month and aces, he stopped. Started again, in the quieter register. Just teach me everything you know. Both of you. At the same time if you want. I'll keep up. Dragon looked at him. Garp looked at him. Something passed between Dragon and Garp across the training platform. Not agreement exactly, because they were not people who agreed easily and were not going to become such people in the next 26 days. But something. An acknowledgement of what was in front of them, in the form of a 17-year-old boy eating an enormous lunch and waiting with complete patience for them to finish arguing so that the thing he had come here to do could continue. From the top, Garp said to Luffy. Luffy put down the food and stood up. The hockey work starts tonight, Dragon said. After the physical session. 2 hours. Fine, Garp said. Fine, Luffy said, which was the same word but meant something completely different. Not negotiated acceptance but genuine uncomplicated assent. The agreement of someone who had not been waiting for the negotiation to resolve in a particular direction, but had been waiting for it to resolve in any direction so that they could move. The session resumed. Dragon moved to the platform's edge and watched Garp push Luffy into the next round, and he thought about what he knew about the gum-gum fruit, the real knowledge, the thing he had told Luffy last night in the sparse way that he told things. The words that had gone into the clearing's dark and landed in his son's understanding with the characteristic Luffy reception. Absorbed, processed, filed, immediately subordinated to the practical question of what to do with it. He thought about the fruit's true name. The sleeping power inside it. He thought about Marineford. He thought, 26 days. He had spent 20 years believing that the revolution was the most important thing he had. The cause that superseded everything else. The thing that justified every sacrifice. He stood at the edge of the training platform and watched his son get hit by forces that would have killed most people and bounce back, literally, and get up again. And he thought about the 20 years of watching from a distance. And he thought about the file in his cabinet. And he thought about the specific quality of the look on Garp's face when he picked Luffy up. He thought, I have been present for none of this. He thought, I am present for this. Not very much of it. 26 days. And then Marineford, and whatever came after Marineford. Not the years of childhood, not the growing up, not any of the things that Garp had been there for and that Dragon's file had been a substitute for, a poor one. A document trying to do the work of presence and failing as documents always failed at that work. But this. He was here for this. He watched Luffy land from Gear Second's extension, roll, absorb the impact, come up already moving. He watched the rubber snap back. He watched the grin, still there, still the same grin, through exhaustion and impact and the accumulated punishment of an already brutal morning. He thought, for the first time in 20 years, in the part of himself that was not the revolutionary commander but was something older. That's my son. He did not say it out loud. He was not equipped to say it out loud, not yet, possibly not ever in those words. But he thought it. He let himself think it fully, without immediately redirecting to function, without subordinating it to strategy. That's my son. Dragon, Garp said from across the platform, without looking at him. You're observing when you should be training. Get on the platform. Dragon looked at Garp. Garp looked back at him with the expression of someone who had watched Dragon stand at the edge and had understood exactly what was happening there, and was not going to comment on it directly, and was also not going to allow it to continue past its useful duration. Dragon stepped onto the platform. Luffy looked at him with the direct gaze. What are you going to teach me first? Luffy said. Dragon thought about everything he knew. The 20 years. The revolution. The file in the cabinet. The fruit's true nature. The hockey work. The strategic framework. The things he was equipped to give and the things he was not, and the difference between those categories. How to lose a fight without being defeated, Dragon said. Luffy looked at him. It's not the same thing, Dragon said. Show me, Luffy said. Dragon showed him. By the time the first day ended, the sun going down behind the mountain range, the training facility lit by the Revolutionary Army's operational lighting, the clearing showing the evidence of what had happened in it across 12 hours in the form of cracked stone and scored earth, and the general atmosphere of a space that had been subjected to forces beyond its design parameters. Something had been established. Not agreement. Not ease. Not any of the things that 26 days would require them to build toward, but something. Garp sat on the obstacle course's remaining northern wall with a bowl of rice crackers and looked at the clearing. Dragon stood at the facility's edge with his cloak moving in the evening wind. Luffy was asleep on the combat platform. He had crossed directly from the last training exercise into unconsciousness with the completeness of someone whose body had simply closed the account for the day. He's going to get there, Garp said. Not a question. Yes, Dragon said. You're sure? About the fruit? I'm sure, Dragon said. I've been sure for 3 years. I've been waiting for. He paused. I've been waiting to tell him. Garp was quiet for a moment. 3 years, he said. Yes. And you didn't come tell him, Garp said. 3 years ago. The statement sat in the evening air. Dragon did not respond immediately, because the response was complicated, because the response was the whole 20 years of it, and not just the 3, and because some of it was defensible, and some of it was not, and he was not in the habit of the distinction being that difficult to locate. No, he said. I didn't. Garp ate a rice cracker. He didn't ask you about it, Garp said. About why you weren't there. I thought he'd ask. He might, Dragon said. Later. He might not, Garp said. That's also Luffy. He might decide that now is now and before is before, and the question of why isn't one he needs answered. A pause. That would be worse, I think. For you. Dragon looked at the combat platform where his son was asleep in the position of someone who had given everything available, and would get up tomorrow and give it again. Yes, he said. I think it would. Garp offered the rice crackers across the space between them. Dragon looked at them. He took one. They sat in the evening quiet of Station 12, the revolutionary and the marine hero, the 2 men who had built the most important person either of them had ever loved out of absence and distance, and a file in a cabinet, and a fist of love, and the specific daily choice to watch rather than go, and they sat with the weight of that, and the rice crackers, and the sleeping boy on the combat platform, and the 26 days in front of them, and the thing at the end of the 26 days that was Marineford. Tomorrow, Dragon said. Tomorrow, Garp agreed. The island went dark around them. Above the training facility, the stars of the Grand Line did their usual work, indifferent and ancient and complete, and below them the work of making something impossible possible continued in the only way it ever continued, one day at a time, with 2 teachers who agreed on nothing and 1 student who needed everything. Day 5 began the way days 4, 3, and 2 had begun, before dawn, without ceremony, with the specific quality of mornings that exist entirely in service of what is going to happen in them rather than for themselves. Luffy was on the platform first. He was always on the platform first, which had stopped surprising Dragon after day 2 and had started meaning something different by day 4. Not eagerness exactly, though it was that, but something underneath eagerness, the specific gravity of someone for whom the training was not a process they were enduring but the most direct available route to the thing they needed, and who therefore treated every hour of not training as a subtraction from something finite and precious. Dragon had been awake since 3. He had spent the pre-dawn hours reviewing the previous 4 days' observations, building the model of what Luffy could do and what he couldn't yet, and what the gap between those 2 things looked like from the outside. The model was detailed. It was also, Dragon had admitted to himself in the specific honesty of 3 in the morning, more complete than he had expected to have by day 5, because Luffy's development curve was not standard and the file had not adequately conveyed the degree to which watching him in person was a different category of information than any intelligence report. The file had told Dragon that Luffy was exceptional. Watching him train had told Dragon that exceptional was the wrong word, that it implied a comparison to a standard that did not apply, that what Luffy was doing was not being better at a thing that other people did but being a thing that other people weren't, and the distinction mattered enormously for training because you could not develop what you didn't understand. Garp had known this. Garp had known it without being able to articulate it, the way he knew most things, through 40 years of direct contact rather than analysis. Dragon had needed 5 days to arrive at what Garp had already had. He wrote that in his notes, without particular judgment. It was accurate. It was useful. Self-assessment that excluded uncomfortable data was not self-assessment. He went to the platform. The wall announced itself on day 5 at the midday session. It did not announce itself dramatically. That was the thing about real ceilings. They did not present as dramatic barriers, as visible obstacles, as things you could see and orient yourself against. They presented as the subtle wrongness of effort producing less than it should, the feeling of pushing against something that was not resistance but was absence, the thing beyond which more force simply did not translate to more result. Luffy hit it in the middle of the 4th gear second exercise sequence. Dragon saw it happen. He was watching from the platform's edge, running the observational assessment that he ran alongside every physical session, cataloging output against the model in real time. He saw the moment. The transition into gear second went correctly. The blood pump engaged with the speed and pressure that the technique required. The steam began rising from the skin in the pattern he had come to recognize as Luffy's specific expression of the form. And then the output plateaued. Not the physical output. The movement was still fast, still far beyond standard baseline, still the technique working as designed. But the potential output, the ceiling of what gear second at this level could reach, was visible in the specific quality of the effort. He was working at maximum. Maximum was not enough. Garp saw it at the same moment. Dragon knew because Garp's expression changed in the small way it changed when he was recalibrating. The slight shift around the eyes that was his version of concern made operational. Luffy knew it too. He came out of the sequence, and stood on the platform and looked at his hands. Not with frustration. Luffy did not process frustration the way most people processed it, as a thing that accumulated and soured. He processed it as information, the same way he processed everything, with the direct attention of someone for whom the world was primarily data about what to do next. He looked at his hands and he was reading something. It stopped, he said. Yes, Dragon said. The feeling. When gear second kicks in, there's a feeling, like something opening. Like a door. He looked at his hands. Today it opened and there wasn't anything on the other side. Dragon walked onto the platform. He stood across from Luffy and looked at him with the full assessment attention, reading the physical state, the hockey signature, the fruit's current expression. Describe the feeling more precisely, he said. Luffy thought about this with the genuine consideration he gave to questions that required internal investigation rather than external action. It's like, when I was a kid, in Fusha there was this well in the village square. Old stone well. Really deep. When you threw a rock and you'd hear it hit the water a long time after you let it go. He paused. Gear second feels like the rock falling. Like there's more depth below me than I've reached yet. But today I hit the water. Dragon was quiet for a moment. Garp had come onto the platform from the other side. He was listening to Luffy's description with the expression of someone hearing something confirmed rather than something new. You hit the water, Dragon said. Yeah, Luffy said. And I don't know how to go deeper. Dragon looked at Garp. Garp looked at Dragon. In the space between them was the awareness of what this meant, that they had reached the edge of what the current approach was going to produce, that the next phase required something different, and that what was different was not more of the same, but something that neither of them had been ready to start yet. Sit down, Dragon said. Luffy sat on the platform in the cross-legged position he used when he was genuinely listening, which was distinguishable from his not really listening position by the angle of his head and the stillness of his hands. Dragon stood in front of him. He was aware of how infrequently he stood in positions like this, standing in front of someone to teach them something that was not tactical, not strategic, not operational. He was aware that what he was about to do required something from him that his 20 years of revolutionary command had not been the primary development ground for. He sat down too. Garp remained standing, which was accurate. What was about to happen was Dragon's to give, not Garp's, and Garp knew it, and his remaining standing was his version of stepping back. Tell me, Dragon said, why you fight? Luffy looked at him. To protect my friends, he said. Immediate. No deliberation. Go deeper, Dragon said. That is the answer, Luffy said, with the mild pushback of someone who had given the correct response and was being asked to improve on correct. It's the surface of the answer, Dragon said. It's true. It's not complete. He paused, building the next part carefully because this was the place where his instinct toward precision and Luffy's instinct toward simplicity had to find some point of contact. When you protect your friends, what are you protecting them from? Luffy thought about this. Things that want to hurt them, he said. What kind of things? Strong things. Powerful things. He paused. Unjust things. The word arrived in the conversation with a slight shift in weight. Dragon registered it. Unjust, he said. That's a specific word. Crocodile was unjust, Luffy said. Enel was unjust. The world government was unjust to Robin. He said these things with the calm certainty of someone reporting observable facts. The thing they all had in common was that they decided they got to choose who mattered and who didn't. Who deserved to exist and who didn't. He was looking at Dragon with a direct gaze. I don't like that. I don't accept it. Dragon was quiet for a moment. In his peripheral awareness he registered Garp, behind him, very still. Marineford, Dragon said, is going to be full of people who have decided that Ace doesn't matter enough to keep alive. That the example of executing a pirate who carries the name D is worth more than his life. He kept his voice even clinical, because this was the place where clinical served rather than failed. The three admirals believe they are doing what is necessary for the world's order. Most of the Marines in that fortress believe they are on the right side. The institution that built them told them so. They're wrong, Luffy said. Yes, Dragon said. They are wrong. But understanding that they are wrong and understanding why they are wrong are different things. And the difference matters because, he paused. The wall you hit today, the ceiling of what Gear Second can currently reach. Do you know why it's there? Luffy looked at his hands again. Because I'm not strong enough yet, he said. Because your power is calibrated to what you believe you can do, Dragon said. And what you believe you can do is based on what you have needed to do so far. Every ceiling you've broken through, Arlong, Crocodile, Enel, Lucci, you broke through because the need exceeded the ceiling. Something became more important than the limit. He met Luffy's eyes. The wall is not a physical wall. The wall is the edge of what you currently believe is possible. And what you believe is possible is directly connected to what you understand you are fighting for. Luffy looked at him. The well you described, Dragon said. The rock falling. The depth below. That depth is real. It's not metaphor. Your fruit has capacity that you haven't accessed because you haven't needed it yet. What's going to unlock it is not more training in the physical sense. More training builds what's already there. What will break the current ceiling is understanding, completely, not as a statement but as a truth you feel in the way you feel the Gear Second pump, what you are actually fighting against. A silence on the training platform. The island's wind moved through the clearing. The afternoon light was the specific quality of Grand Line midday, sharp and clean. I'm fighting against people who want to kill Ace, Luffy said. Go deeper, Dragon said. I'm fighting against. Luffy stopped. He was doing the genuine processing, the deep kind, the kind that Dragon had come to recognize over 5 days as the tell of a mind that worked slowly in the philosophical register, and arrived at things other minds missed. I'm fighting against the idea that power decides who matters, he said slowly. That whoever is strongest gets to decide who lives. Yes, Dragon said. That's what the world government is, Luffy said. They're the strongest thing in the world right now, so they think they get to decide everything. Who's a pirate? Who's an enemy? Who gets executed? Yes. I've always known that, Luffy said. I just didn't have the words for it. The words don't matter, Dragon said. The feeling does. The complete feeling, not just the anger at what's wrong, but the absolute certainty of what's right. He paused. What is right for you, Luffy? Not what is wrong. What is right? Luffy was quiet for a longer moment than Dragon expected. That people get to be free, Luffy said. That's what GOLD, Roger said, right? That's what the One Piece is supposed to mean. That you can go anywhere, do anything, be anything. His voice had a quality in it that Dragon had not heard before, a lower register underneath the usual brightness. Ace exists. He's real. He chose to be a pirate. He chose his crew and his captain and his life. Nobody gave him the right to do that, he just did it, because it was his. And now they want to take him away because they've decided their rules matter more than his life. He looked at Dragon. That's not how it works. That's not how it should work. People don't belong to the world government. People belong to themselves. The platform was very quiet. Dragon looked at his son. He had written, 20 years ago, in the first manifesto document of what would become the Revolutionary Army, a version of that sentence. Not those words. Different words, more formal, more constructed, but that sentence. That idea. That specific belief about the fundamental relationship between human beings and the systems that claimed authority over them. His son had arrived at it alone. Not through education, not through revolutionary philosophy, not through the years of intellectual framework building that Dragon had done. Through Nami, who had been owned. Through Robin, who had been hunted. Through every person Luffy had met whose freedom had been taken or threatened by something larger than themselves, absorbed and processed and synthesized into this simple, total, correct thing. That's what you're fighting for, Dragon said. His voice was level. He was keeping it level. Hold on to that. Not as an idea. As a fact. As real as your arm being rubber. When you go into gear second and you find the wall, go there. Go to that feeling. The depth below the wall is not power. It's conviction. The power comes from the conviction. Luffy looked at him for a moment. You believe that too, Luffy said. Not a question. Dragon looked at his son. Yes, he said. Is that why you, Luffy started? Stopped. Dragon waited. Luffy looked at the platform floor. Then back up. Is that why you do the revolution thing? Because you think people should be free? Yes, Dragon said. Then why didn't you? Another stop. Luffy was navigating something. Dragon could see it. The question that had been circling and that was now, in this specific moment of the philosophical conversation, close enough to the surface to be almost said. Why didn't I stay? Dragon said. Luffy looked at him. Because I made a choice, Dragon said. Between two things that I believed in. I chose the larger one. He paused. I'm not asking you to think that was right. I'm not certain it was right. I'm telling you what it was. Luffy was quiet for a moment. His hands were in his lap, the fingers slightly curled in the way they curled when he was thinking rather than moving. He looked at Dragon with the complete, direct gaze that was, Dragon thought, the most specific thing his son had that was purely his own, not from Garp, not from whoever Luffy's mother was, not from Dragon himself, just Luffy, the quality of looking at the world without flinching from what was in it. I would have stayed, Luffy said. Simply. I know, Dragon said. But you thought the revolution was more important than you, Dragon said? Yes. I thought it was. He met his son's eyes. I spent 20 years believing that. Standing here now, I am less certain than I have been. The honesty of it sat in the afternoon air. Dragon had not planned to say it. He was aware that he had said it, and that it was true, and that the truth of it was not something he had fully examined before this moment. Luffy looked at him for a long time. Then he said, with the complete simplicity that was his most devastating mode, It's okay. You're here now. Dragon looked at his son. Garp, behind Dragon, made the sound. The specific sound, the one that Dragon had no word for. Dragon did not turn around. Get up, Dragon said, and his voice was as level as he could make it, which was not entirely level. Let's try again. Luffy got up. The second attempt at the gear second ceiling happened 40 minutes later. Dragon ran the observational assessment. Garp stood at the platform's edge. Luffy went into the sequence. The pump engaged. The steam rose. The speed increased. And then, at the point where the wall had been, something different happened, not a dramatic breakthrough. Not the explosive, visible, training facility destroying event that Dragon's modeling had suggested might occur when the ceiling came down. Something quieter, an extension, a deepening, the specific quality of something that had been running at maximum, discovering that maximum was not fixed. The speed increased past the point it had reached before. Small. A few percent. Not the revolution. But real. Measurable. The wall, not destroyed, but moved. Luffy came out of the sequence, and looked at his hands. That was different, he said. Yes, Dragon said. It felt like, he paused. Like the rock fell further. It did, Dragon said. Luffy looked at him with the expression that Dragon was coming to understand as his son's version of something that other people expressed more openly, a gratitude that was not comfortable for Luffy to hold as a concept and that therefore expressed itself as this specific look, the one that said the thing had landed, that it mattered, that he was keeping it. Again, Luffy said. Again, Dragon agreed. That night, the crew gathered in the western barracks around a fire that Frankie had built with the engineering enthusiasm he brought to all construction projects, regardless of scale. The fire was larger than a fire for 8 people needed to be, and better constructed, and had a specific architectural quality that suggested it had been approached as a problem to be optimally solved rather than a necessity to be minimally met. Zoro was not asleep, which was unusual enough for post-training hours that Nami had noted it. He was sitting at the fire's edge with the look he had when he was working something through in the register that was not sleep or training or combat but the register that preceded all of them, the quiet, deep, turning it over quality of someone who had not yet finished deciding something. Robin was reading, which was her standard evening state, but the book was closed in her lap and her eyes were on the fire rather than the page, which meant she was not reading but was using the reading position as cover for thinking. Nami had her charts spread on the barrel sheet appropriated as a work surface, plotting and replanning and plotting again the route to Marineford, running the variables, currents, marine patrol patterns, the intelligence about the bay's approach channels that Garp had quietly left in an unmarked folder on the facility's common table, which nobody had commented on because commenting on it would have required acknowledging that a Marine Vice Admiral had just given them operational intelligence about Marine headquarters. And some things were smoother when left unacknowledged. He's going to make it, Usopp said to the fire. Nobody asked who he was talking about. Obviously, Sanji said. I know obviously, Usopp said. I'm saying it out loud. Because it's been 5 days and they're training him so hard I can hear it from here and I just, yeah? He's going to make it. He hit something today, Zoro said, without looking up from the fire. In the midday session. I heard it stop. He hit a wall, Robin said, and closed her book properly now, setting it aside. I was close enough to observe. His gear's second plateaued. The output stopped developing. Is that bad? Chopper said, with the expression of someone who had been trying not to ask this question for several hours. It was, Robin said. Then Dragon talked to him. Then he tried again. She paused. The second attempt was different. Not dramatically, but measurably. Dragon talked to him, Nami said from the charts. Yes. What did he say? I couldn't hear the content, Robin said. I could read the conversation's quality from the body language. Dragon sat down to deliver it, which is not his standard mode. Luffy was entirely still while receiving it, which is also not his standard mode. A pause. Whatever was said, it went in. Nami looked at the charts. She thought about the Den Mushi call 3 days ago, the voice that had said Luffy's name with the careful controlled quality of someone who had planned every word. She thought about what it would be to have a father who was the world's most wanted man, and who had never been there and who showed up, precisely now, to do the thing that was needed. Do you think Luffy cares? She said. About Dragon. As his father. Not just as a trainer. A silence around the fire. He cares about everything, Usopp said. That's Luffy? He can't not care. That's not what she asked, Zoro said. I know it's not what she asked, Usopp said. I'm saying, with Luffy, the caring isn't a separate thing. He's not going to process Dragon as the trainer and Dragon as the absent father as 2 different problems. It's all the same thing. It all goes into the same place. His heart is not subdivided, Robin said, with the precision of someone identifying a technical specification. He does not partition experience. Everything that happens to him happens to all of him, which means, Nami said slowly, following the logic that whatever Dragon is doing in that training session, teaching him, talking to him, being present, it's all going into the same place. The training and the fact of him being there are not separate. And that's probably, Robin said, why the second attempt was different from the first. The fire crackled. The Grand Line night was doing its usual work above them, the stars enormous and indifferent, the island's forest moving in the evening wind. Luffy's going to be a different person after this month, Nami said. Not sadly. As a fact. Not different Luffy. But more of him, good, Zoro said. He had gone back to looking at the fire, but something in the line of his shoulders had changed, a slight settling. He's going to need more of him. On the training platform, which Dragon had not left since the evening session ended because there were elements of the day's development that he was still processing, Luffy sat with his back against the platform's edge and looked at the stars. He was thinking about the wall. Not the breakthrough, the wall itself. The specific quality of hitting the ceiling of what you could currently do, the way it felt to run full effort into the absolute edge of your capacity and find it insufficient. He had felt it before, in fights, in the specific moments before something in him had opened further. He had felt it against Lucci. He had felt it against Enel. He had always broken through because something became more important than the limit. Dragon had given him the framework for that. The philosophical structure beneath the feeling, the why that made the limit negotiable, the understanding that the ceiling was not fixed but was calibrated to the conviction underneath it. Luffy turned this over. He was not a framework thinker by instinct. Robin was a framework thinker, Nami was a framework thinker, Zoro in his own silent way was a framework thinker. Luffy thought in images, in feelings, in the specific sensory quality of things he had experienced. He thought in the rock falling. He thought in the depth of the well. Dragon had said, the depth is real. He thought about what Dragon had said afterward. The thing he had not planned to say, Luffy could tell, not because Dragon had shown something dramatic. Dragon did not show things dramatically, but because the quality of the words was different from his planned words. His planned words were precise and structured and arrived with the quality of things that had been organized before delivery. What he had said about choosing the revolution over Luffy had arrived differently. I spent 20 years believing that. Standing here now, I am less certain than I have been. Luffy held this. He was not angry. He had found, examining the inside of himself for anger, that it was not there in the form he might have expected. What was there was something more complicated, not forgiveness, because forgiveness implied an accounting that Luffy did not particularly want to do. Something more like, you are here now, and here now is real, and the before is the before. He thought about Ace. He thought about Sabo. He had lost Sabo. He had been 7 and he had lost Sabo and the world had become a smaller and more terrible place, and he had understood, at 7, in the way that children understand catastrophic things, completely, physically, in the whole body, what it meant when someone was gone. He was not going to lose Ace. The wall would move. He would move it. Dragon's framework would give him the philosophical foundation, and Garp's brutal training would give him the physical vehicle and the fruit. The thing Dragon had told him about the fruit, the real name of it, the sleeping thing inside it, was going to give him something that he did not yet have words for but that felt, in the deep intuitive register that was his most reliable sense, like the most important part. He stretched his arm out, upward, reaching toward the stars with the extended rubber, let it hang there, felt the pull of it, the elastic potential, the thing that was always ready to snap back with more force than it left with. That was the fruit. That was what it did, it stored what came at you and returned it amplified. He thought about what Dragon had told him. The true name. The sleeping power. The reason the world government had been afraid of this fruit specifically, not because of what it was now but because of what it would eventually be. He pulled his arm back, snapped it, felt the amplification. He thought, there's more here. There is so much more here. He got up. The night was clear and cold. He looked at the facility, the training platform, the obstacle course, the evidence of 5 days of work. 21 days left. He stretched his arm out again, this time toward the tree line, let it reach as far as it would go, felt the pull, held it. He thought about Ace on the execution platform. He thought about what Dragon had said. They've decided the example is worth more than his life. He thought about what he had said back. People belong to themselves. He held the stretch. He felt the well. He felt the depth below the wall. He pulled the arm back. The snap was louder than usual. The recoil traveled up his arm and through his shoulder, and he felt it in his chest. Not pain, something else. The specific feeling of something that had been running at its limit, finding that its limit had moved, fractionally, really, measurably. He grinned. He stretched again. Dragon, walking back to the facility from the direction of the eastern cliff where he had been standing in the dark thinking about the things he was not equipped to fully think about yet, stopped at the tree line. Luffy was on the platform alone, in the dark, running the extension exercises that they had worked on in the evening session, doing them alone, past the end of any scheduled training, with the specific